I'm not leaning forward. Hi, I'm Karishma. Can everyone hear me? Great. Okay, so I'm a partner in the patent group. I work out of the Boston office. My practice is drafting patent applications and prosecuting them. Prosecuting means I negotiate with the patent office back and forth on what claims are allowed in a patent, etc. That's what prosecuted means. And my practice is focused on software and AI related inventions. So things like generative AI models, LLM, predictive models, speech recognition, NLP, etc. All right, so what is generative AI? So generative AI is artificial intelligence that's capable of generating new data, data like text, image, audio, etc. And it learns patterns and structures from its training data, the input training data, and then generates new content. One example are large language models. We've probably all heard of ChatGPT. Has everyone heard of ChatGPT? All right, anybody played around in ChatGPT? All right, we're gonna play around in it a little bit today, see how it works and what it tells us. Yeah, LLM is one example. Other examples are image generating models, speech generation models, models that convert speech to text. There also can be generative models. All right, so you're probably thinking, so AI isn't new. I guess the hype about it right now is because ChatGPT is a big thing. So ChatGPT is a type of generative AI. So you may wonder, what is the old AI or what's the other type of AI? Well, they're called predictive or discriminative models. So here's a little comparison chart between generative and predictive models. So as I mentioned, generative models, they generate new data. Predictive models, they tend to classify inputs into trained or selected categories. So like you put an input in the model, all it can tell you is whether it's category A or category B, right? It's not like ChatGPT where it can just produce answers or generate new data based on what you asked it to do. Generative models are trained on large amounts of data. So LLMs are probably trained on like the Internet of Things. All websites, blogs, everything that's available on the internet has gone into the LLM. The predictive model, it's trained on chosen labeled data. So for the example of category A versus category B, we're gonna train the model with good examples of category A, bad examples of category A, good examples of category B, bad examples of category B, and also examples of neither category A or category B. So it's gonna learn from a very controlled data set. It's not picking things up from the entire internet. And then generative models are configured for generic tasks like ChatGPT can basically answer about anything. Predictive models are very specific, like the one that the example I provided, it's category A and category B, that's it. It can't do anything else for you. Generative models, because they're trained on large amounts of data and are generic, are probably lower in accuracy compared to predictive models. And the generative models are also larger models and predictive models are smaller models. For comparison purposes, like ChatGPT version 3.5 is 175 billion parameters. That's billion with a B. If you don't know what parameters are, don't worry about it. It's just a lot of data. So you need like huge amounts of computer power, memory, processors to actually run a model like ChatGPT. Speaking of like predictive models, almost all the systems and devices you use right now are using predictive models like Alexa, Siri, OK Google. All those are using these complicated series of models behind the scene to actually understand what you're saying and then doing what you said it to do. So you can tell, Alexa, like, hey, play my playlist, and it converts what you said to text, then maps it to an action that causes the playlist to play. All those are predictive models. Those are not generative models. So that's the old AI, and it's been working pretty well, right? I mean, so what else? You've probably seen those response suggestions in Outlook popping up. those are also predictive models. Those are not generative models. And then Suzanne mentioned Google search. So Google uses some search algorithms, predictive model algorithms, ranking algorithms. It's not using generative models to provide you searches of websites. Okay, so how can it be useful in the workplace, right? So you probably all heard that it's going to help with efficiency and productivity. You can use it for things like summarizing information. You provide a whole bunch of documents or something like that. It can pretty quickly spit out a summary of what you gave it. Answer questions. You want to check accuracy, obviously. It can generate images, generate speech, transcription, generate first drafts. The reason I said first drafts is that you don't want to take what it gives you and just send it off as your work product. You definitely want to check it for accuracy and other issues that I'm about to talk about. And definitely can be very helpful if you use a specifically programmed tool instead of like a generic tool like ChatGPT. Other workplace examples, specific examples, you can use it for like chatbot, for employee support. You can use it to analyze employee feedback or provide product support, etc. Oh, let's do a little play around. Grab. Oh, I don't want that. Okay. So I logged into the free version of ChatGPT, basically just using my email address, and I've been playing around with it for a little bit. But when you, where's the mouse? There you go. When you log in, this is the first thing ChatGPT tells you. It says, ask away. Sure, let's do all these things. Don't share sensitive information. Why? Because it uses to improve their own services. And check your facts. It says we have safeguards, but we may give you inaccurate information, by the way, right? So these are all the things we're gonna go over. So let's do this, right? All right, so you can definitely use ChatGPT to kind of do some of your creative thinking type, or give you like a first draft version of something that you want to do. So I want to try this. Can you give me some interview questions for an accounting position? Right. So now it's going to start generating. Mind you, each time you put in the same question, it can generate different answers because it's generating new content. It's not going to be the same every time. All right, anybody in here familiar with accounting positions? All right, so does this look accurate? Good? Yeah, okay. Yeah, pretty detailed, right? So, I mean, this is definitely a starting point, right? You can edit to tailor it to your position, to your company, right? Oh, and it also tells you tailor your questions to the specific needs and requirements. Has a lot of disclaimers and advice and suggestions in it. Let's ask it to be shorter. Can you make it? Or can you limit to the top 5 questions? If I can spell questions. Okay, let's see. How's it do it? There you go. And now you have top 5. Right? Oh, that's a good question. An evaluation of. Yeah, so let's see. Explain difference, ensure accuracy, financial software, experience with recurring. Okay. And we go difference, accuracy, financial. Oh, look at that. So it didn't really do any thinking, right? It just took the same. Yeah. Yeah. But that's one of the things to like. Yep. I think someone had mentioned talking to other people about generative AI, in the school setting, when the students use ChatGPT to generate work product, a professor or teacher mentioned she knows how to tell the difference because there's a lack of opinion in it. Like it's pretty like only factual. It doesn't talk about like themes or like how they felt about the character saying this or that, etc. Oh, good point. Let's see. Generate a job description for HR manager. Keep it under 300 words. There. It actually has sections, how to apply, why join us. I found it pretty interesting that it talks about, you know, we offer competitive compensation package, all these kind of things, right? All these things that it learned from looking at job descriptions on the internet, right? It figured that, oh, a lot of these job descriptions include these words, so it's gonna work it into its own generation. Some qualifications, if anything looks inaccurate, by the way, point it out. But if it all looks pretty good as a starting point, that's the whole point of this, is use it as a starting point. Right. Also starts off with this, you know, you want to have the location, company, about us, paragraph, all those things. Right. Description, right. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so let's try some factual questions. So one of the things I'm going to cover is why are these type of models so inaccurate? It's because their knowledge is not current. So we're going to demonstrate that. Who won the Super Bowl in 2022? Oh. Okay. Like that. It says, I don't have access to real-time information. My knowledge is limited to January 20 of 22. So it literally can't go search the internet and give you the answer, even though we could do that and find it out pretty easily. Yeah. Lawyer and the judge wanted to agree on something. So one of the lawyers in the pit, and they delivered and references to cases. So it made them up. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. 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 He's a New York attorney who did that. Yeah. Generated a brief using one of these type of models. I think it was ChatGPT. That's what he said. And the reason that happened is because all ChatGPT did is take everything that's available on the internet, learn how a case name looks, right? And then made up like, you know, oh, there has to be a first party versus like the V dot second party, maybe a year. And I think some of the case citations even was missing the court designation because it couldn't figure out, do I put federal circuit there? Do I put, you know, US district this, right? And it just put the date in there. So, so it's good at mimicking relationships or patterns in textual data, but it has real trouble figuring out what is real or what is factually correct. And that's just like, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but that's just the free version of ChatGPT 3.5, right? Let me just leave it for other slides. Another thing we'll see, I wanted to try out this example. For some reason it has trouble arranging objects. So make a stable tower. Using a book, a glass, a ball, and a pen. Right? Oh, see, now this is a different answer than what when I tried this out in the morning, it gave me a one-line answer. And now it gave me this whole paragraph of what's going on. All right, so it said start placing, maybe it's the way that I asked the question. All right, place the book and then class on there, remove the cap from the pen. Oh, on top of the glass. So it wants me to put the pen on top of the glass right there to support the ball. All right, that's interesting. It thought a little bit more about it. Maybe because I already asked it questions this morning. These are automatic labels, by the way. I did not generate these labels. From this morning, it had given me other things. But this morning, it tried to tell me that I should do book, glass, pen, and then ball. So I guess its reasoning was that I'm going to put the ball carefully on top of the pen to balance it. If you give it some other items, it comes up with some variations where you're just like, no, that would not work. Like, how would you put the ball underneath the book or something like that? So, but one thing about this is it's constantly learning. So every time you put in a new input, and then you come back and you put in an input again, like it gave me way more information this time than it did earlier, like literally at 10 o'clock this morning. Gave me a whole detailed explanation on how you're going to build this tower, right? So that's why you can get different answers to the same questions within the same day. Right. Similar to the Super Bowl example, like it also has trouble telling us who's the current US president. It will tell us something like, as of January 2022, Joe Biden was the current US president. No? So it doesn't have current knowledge. Switch back. All right. This is, I used a free image generator program called Deep AI. And I just gave it a prompt saying a police officer, and that's what it generated. For some reason, it has a big problem, at least the free versions of these tools have a huge problem generating real people's faces. So that's why I zoomed in a little bit to show you what kind of face it generated for a police officer. It got the uniform and those kind of things right. I don't really know what's going on over there, but some of the things, like from far away, it looks like a police officer. You dive into details and you're like, don't really know what's going on. Right? So that's just another example. All right. Some of the things you want to consider when using generative tools. So input, output, and training. For input, like we saw at the ChatGPT, the beginning disclaimer is like, don't put sensitive information in there. So you want to avoid private information, confidential, anything that you don't want other people overhearing in a public place. You don't want to put it into at least the free tools like ChatGPT, or even maybe the paid version of ChatGPT. You don't want to put that in there. Why? Because it's going to store your data. It's going to store your inputs and then use it to retrain or make their tool better. Industry jargon, inputs for generative models are called prompts. So if you see it while using these models, you know, the prompt was this, or even a new job title now is prompt engineers. Their job is to just come up with inputs to generative models. And the way you phrase your inputs affects the output from the model. So there's actually people who have been trained on generating these inputs to specifically gear the model to output more accurate information or in specific formats, etc. Right. Output from the tool, you want to check for accuracy, bias, and toxicity. I'll go over that in more details on the next slide. For training, what I mean is that you want to look at what the tool is trained on. Is it a generically trained tool? Is it specifically trained? What is the training data, right? For something specific, was it given specific data? Like, for example, if you want to generate a first draft of a contract or a legal document, you want to make sure that the training data included examples of those things. And then when was the knowledge updated? Are you using it to answer current questions or current knowledge? Then you should make sure that the knowledge was updated for that model, right? Now for the output, you want to check for accuracy. As we just went through it, like it has a tendency of making up fake information because of its generative nature. The industry jargon for this technical issue is called model hallucinations. The definition of a model hallucination is a model output that is not real, does not match any data the algorithm has been trained on, or any other identifiable pattern. Like it just made it up. It's hallucinating basically. And the model is generated with such high confidence too, because it's so sure that what it is outputting is real to them, right? It's a high probability to them that this is right. Like this is the case law. This is how you can make a stable tower, etc. Right? Another reason that these models are so inaccurate is because these large generative models are not retrained pretty frequently. So like we saw ChatGPT was last updated January of 2022. That's pretty common for large models because it's very expensive to train these models. It costs them millions of dollars to just come up with ChatGPT, the first version. So retraining it is going to cost another millions of dollars, probably years, months of work. So they don't retrain the model over and over again. In comparison, predictive models, like the ones that Siri or Alexa or some of the other systems use, those are trained pretty frequently, like multiple times a year. Some of them are trained every month just to keep up with the new trend or new inputs or whatever they're getting so that they're more accurate. Bias. So the model, you've probably all heard of this in your industry, in your workplace, that models, predictive models, AI models, they learn biases from their training data, right? And what do I mean by bias? So the training data can represent certain information in a higher quantity versus other cases. So it thinks that the higher quantity examples is the case, right? So a specific example, a gender role bias. The large model like ChatGPT, I haven't tested it out with ChatGPT, but some other models, they probably learned that all doctors are males. Why does it think all doctors are males? Because on the internet, there are probably more male doctors represented, like more websites have male doctors, they probably publish more papers, etc. So now, even though there's some female doctors, the model has taken it as its knowledge or taken it as true that all doctors are males. What happens because of that? That if you ask it something about like some medical information or anything related to the medical field, it's going to produce an output that uses a lot of male pronouns, and it's not going to include any female pronouns, right? So that's pretty biased. And then if you take that output and you put it on your website or you put it in an email, you're going to appear biased, right? So you want to check the outputs, model outputs for such biases. Gender roles, race, ethnicity, age-based roles, etc. right? All those are biases that it's going to learn just from the Internet of Things, just from like the training data that it got, right? The other term that the industry uses is toxicity. This is a term for certain types of inappropriate content and language. So the models can generate language or content that can be violent, harmful, profane, include profanity, etc. You want to be careful with image generator models. Some of them can include nudity in the images that it generates, right? Because it doesn't know any better. It just learned from all the images that it got. You know, it probably, I don't know, learned, maybe it got images of babies in diapers, right? And then it thinks, oh, you know, when I generate images of people, it's okay if they're in diapers, right? Like, it just learns these relationships that are represented on the internet, right? For bias and toxicity, in some cases, you get what you put in. So if your input to the model has a bias included in it, or you're asking for violent information or harmful information, the model is going to respond accordingly, right? I think there was a case in Europe or somewhere, you probably heard of it. The model, or somebody was talking to the model, and then the model told him to go commit suicide. Like, I think they started off saying, like, how do I commit suicide? I don't feel so good, yada, yada, yada. And then eventually the model was like, well, this is how you do it. You should go do it, right? So you want to be careful about what you input. It's going to affect your output, right? All right, now that I've scared you about these models, so now you're probably wondering, like, why should we even use it? How vigilant do we have to be in using these tools, right? So these are just some of the issues that we've noticed in the, how do I put it? Just the model, right? If you're just using model like ChatGPT, you have free reign, user goes in, uses it, whatever, right? There's no control mechanisms. There's no system around it, right? Some of the companies that are developing these tools for consumer use are developing systems. So it's not just the black box model, but they have all these other components that go before the model, after the model, etc. And these model, those components, that's the last bullet point right here. These systems are using mechanisms to check the inputs, check the outputs for all the issues that I mentioned, right? So you don't have to be that scared of using these models. There are systems out there or companies out there that provide mechanisms to mitigate these risks, right? The other slight technical discussion is most of these companies that are developing these systems for consumer use are starting off with a generic model, like ChatGPT, for example, and then they fine tune it. And they fine tune it using a small set of data, right? The good examples, bad examples of whatever task you want to do. And then the model learns that and is pretty good at mimicking those patterns and tasks, right? So you want to look at a model that's specifically trained for your task and use that. And then also the prompts, right? So I mentioned prompt engineering being a new job position. Prompts for tools that are specifically designed are also going to be a little bit fancier. So it's not going to be just like ChatGPT where you just type in a question, you get an answer. You're probably going to have to be trained. You're probably going to have to train your workforce on how to write the prompts for these specifically trained tools. So the prompts are going to probably want, like, the first line has to be a specific thing. The second line has to be examples of what you want from it. The third line will be like, okay, give me like long answer, brief answer, polite answer, playful answer, whatever, right? So the prompts are also going to be specifically structured, and you want to be trained on that stuff. Okay. And then also these systems are going to probably be more accurate than the generic like ChatGPT things, right? These basically what I'm trying to say is, like, the specifically designed tools are going to be useful in the workforce. Don't shy away from using them. You don't want to fall behind the curve either. You want to encourage your workforce to be efficient and productive, right? So choose your tools wisely. All right, so I think all right. So some of the available options, we already tried ChatGPT. It's actually more than chat. It can do image generation, speech generation. I think you have to get the paid version to have access to those tools. Image generators, these are just some of the examples. All of these have free versions and paid versions. Midjourney, Crayon, DALL-E. And then there are a lot of other tools. If you just Google it, all of these tools will pop up. When you play around with it, you'll notice some of them are better than others. A lot of them require payments. They're not free. And then you want to try to use the more recent versions of the tools because they're probably been updated with current knowledge rather than old tools. And then Always another option. The other option is to build your own platform, which probably sounds scary, but it's not that bad. Amazon, AWS has a service called Bedrock, and they provide access to foundation models to perform various tasks. A foundation model is what you call a model that can do one task. So like a text-to-text model, like ChatGPT, a text-to-image model, or image-to-text model, text-to-audio model, etc. And Bedrock gives you access to these different models, and then you can build your own system. So if you want to build your own product support chatbot or employee helpline chatbot, you can use these different models and build it for yourself, for your own company. Why would you want to build your own model? Well, you can fine tune it for your particular tasks, right? Gear it towards your company's data. You can also use your own data. So it's not just trying to generate content from the internet. It's actually learned it from your own company's information, your own product, right? And then it's better suited to respond to your company's needs. And then you can also control how the data is stored and used. So if you have your own platform, then your data will not be used by other companies or other models that are being used by other companies. You can protect your data, provide privacy security measures around it too. And then you can also use your own data to make your own model better, right? The whole point about the reason they want to use your data is to retrain the model, just make it better and better. So if you have your own platform, you can use your own data, retrain your model. Over years, the model is going to get better. Yeah. The last thing that came out was the executive order issued by President Biden on Monday. A lot of this is probably, well, a lot of it was probably not relevant for this group, but most of it relates to the developers and providers of AI technologies, right? Some of the interesting sections are this though. The first one is related to developing guidance for detecting AI generated content and somehow like watermarking it so that consumers know when they're talking to a computer versus a real live person. You probably haven't, maybe you've experienced it, but there's been like scams going on where people call you and it sounds like someone you know, but it's actually a voice generated by a model. And how can you tell the difference whether you're talking to a live person or a computer? So that's what they're trying to develop technologies for. The other one is developing privacy preserving techniques, and then also supporting workers from workplace surveillance, bias, job displacement, etc. There's also a section I didn't include in here, but I think from 100 or 270 days or something like that, or 90 days, the executive order wants a report on best practices for AI-specific cybersecurity risks for financial institutions. That's one of the mandates in there. Yeah, that's all I have. Does anyone have questions or? No? I think Suzanne, you're next. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to quickly, thank you, Krishma, that was great. I'm just going to quickly follow Krishma to talk about policies. So show of hands, how many of you have an AI policy for your workplace? Okay, that's, oh my gosh, I was going to say that's nobody, but one person. All right, so this is not something that a lot of us have dealt with, which is why we have this on the schedule for today. It is, you know, frankly, we're struggling with, I should say struggling, we're talking about this within our own firm. What should our policy be? And I think the message that I hope you hear from me today is do something, have a policy, and probably sooner rather than later. I've been getting calls from clients now, maybe for the last 3 or 4 months, at least a few times a month, somebody will call with a new and interesting thing that they found out that their employees were using AI for. So I think that it's virtually certain that you have people in your workplace that are using AI, and they're using AI for work. And maybe that's perfectly fine. Maybe you don't care. Maybe that's a good thing. Or maybe it isn't. And I think that's really the message here is this is kind of fun. It's fun to play with this stuff and people are doing it. People are interested in this. It's a time saver. If you say, let's just use job descriptions. Anybody love writing job descriptions? Okay. Did you see how quickly you can generate a job description? Why would anybody ever write one again is what I want to know. But if you give somebody a project and you are assuming it's going to take them 2 days to do, because doing it on your own takes 2 days, and instead they can get it done in 2 minutes, what are they doing with the rest of their 2 days? This may very well force us to look differently at how we talk to people in our workplace about what they're doing, how they're doing it. What do they do if now suddenly they're more efficient? What other projects can you have them work on? And so I think the short answer here is have a policy. Now, remember during the pandemic, we were doing policies like every other week. We were changing it. We were learning new stuff. We were on the fly, tweaking our policies. That's what this is going to be like too for a little while. You just got to start somewhere. And then you'll get better at it. You'll figure out how you use it. The products will get better. You'll sort of understand how this is going to look, but start somewhere. Now, what some workplaces are doing is starting by banning it. I don't love that approach because first of all, that's just begging for people to violate your policy. It's also, why would you cut yourself off from all of the potential, right? I think a smarter approach, I mean, you do what works for your organization, but a smarter approach may be, okay, we recognize that you're using it, but there's some rules of the road here. First of all, get approval for the specific type of, let me not go into these details until the next slide. Let me just do some big picture stuff. Standalone or part of a handbook. If you're going to do it iteratively, which is what I really think we're in, like I just think this is going to be an iterative thing, don't put it in your handbook yet. Do a standalone policy that you can update without having to reissue your handbook. That's my recommendation. I would also don't do it in paper form, do it electronically. Everything is done electronically. It's usually helpful if you can get people to sign off. That may be burdensome if you're changing this every 3 or 4 months. At the very least, issue it in a way that you can verify that everybody has received it. There is a nightmare scenario here. The nightmare scenario is that you have confidential information that someone in your team puts out into the world, violating a confidentiality agreement you might have with a customer or violating, sharing your intellectual property, et cetera. You want to make sure that all employees know what your policy is. Okay. So whatever method you can use to ensure that, I wouldn't just stick it on your intranet, for example. I would make sure that there's some trackable way to know that your folks have gotten it. When should you issue it? Soon, like immediately. At least make the decision. Are you banning it? Are you permitting it? Are you requiring approval? Those sorts of big picture issues, grapple with those, issue the policy at that level, and then refine it as as this unfolds a little bit. Anybody worried about that approach? Does that seem too simplistic? Okay, the other thing is training and education. This is a whole new world. And it's kind of an interesting world, frankly. There are resources out there. There's some good training opportunities. Take advantage of any of those things so that you're staying fresh and current in your own understanding of how this is. I initially was like, that's too much. I can't take that on. But once you start realizing that there's tremendous potential for all of us and all the work that we do, I think it's, it's worth delving into a little bit. All right, here are the key elements of a policy. The scope. First of all, who gets the policy? Figure out who's covered by it. Is everybody in your organization subject to it, or just people who are developing certain things? Identify who it is that is covered by this. Data privacy and security has to be front and center. I think it's really important to be very directive about not including any of the company information in any sort of a prompt. Okay, you don't want to be educated unless you're developing your own platform, in which case, great. That's one of the reasons to develop your own platform. But unless you're doing that, make sure your policy front and center says, do not share company information with any model. Attribution. This is an interesting one for me. I'm married to a teacher, and my husband has decided not to ban it in his classroom, but he wants to know when somebody's using it. So he's forcing kids to admit it as opposed to banning it. Figure out how you feel about attribution. Do you care if you say to somebody, go and develop 15 job descriptions? Do you care if they used AI or don't you? If you tell someone to go and develop 15 interview questions, maybe you care a little bit more because we know that there is bias built in. So think about whether you want your employees to tell you if the root of the work product was using generative AI. If you don't care, don't worry about it. But if you do, and maybe you do initially, while we all get comfortable with this, make sure you include that in your policy. Acceptable use, what a lot of our clients are doing, those that are even considering this, which is a small group, they're thinking about a list of approved platforms as opposed to a ban, like here are the ones that we think are okay. All right, so that might be worth looking for. And how do we want you to use this? So which platforms and acceptable use? What are the types of projects we're comfortable with? Consequences for violation, it's really important that your policy address what happens if somebody gets this wrong. And again, if we're talking about confidential information being disclosed, that's pretty serious. There should be some real consequences for that. If we're talking about somebody just not having the best job description, maybe that doesn't matter as much, but I think it's important to think through the consequence issues. Quality control, I have a slide coming up that will help drive home the point about quality control. I think it's worth it to have in your policy something that requires the person who's using generative AI to check accuracy, to do a quality control check before they use it. I think that's a really important issue, especially if we're talking about anything that could be biased. We'll talk about the EEOC guidance in a minute. But I think holding the users of generative AI accountable for the product that they use in the workplace is important. You want to develop good habits, especially at the outset here. You've got to have somebody in your workplace that can answer these questions, somebody who is a contact person, probably somebody who will spend the next several months answering the question, what is generative AI, over and over and over again. So a person with some patience would be helpful. Okay, those are sort of the quick hits on what should be in a policy. Any questions about that long list? Yeah. I have tried that. And unfortunately, I didn't really have very good results. I mean, the policy was sort of, this is what it is, this is how you use it, as opposed to sort of prescriptive, because I didn't give it any inputs or any, my prompts weren't do a policy that prohibits generative AI or only permits it in these circumstances. I didn't do very good prompts. So if you just do a generic thing, it just mostly tells you what generative AI is. Have you done it at all, Karishma? Yeah.
I did use ChatGPT after I did the presentation. My prompt was, I am giving a presentation on generative AI. Give me some what to include in the presentation.
And had you nailed it?
Yeah, it's pretty much, talk about what is generative AI, what are the risks, what are the opportunities, and the types of generative AI. You have to be very, like, the prompt has to be,
right. So, So Young, my associate, and I have been playing around with this. We do a lot of policy writing, and one of the things we're wondering is how good are these platforms at policy writing? But one of the things that we were really delving into is this question of quality control. So Young has this really interesting exchange of conversation with, what pronoun do you use? It, I guess it, with ChatGPT. And she was only using the free version. So you should understand that there is a version of ChatGPT that you pay for that is trained more recently. So what we're talking about with the limitations is on a version that's just free. So it's not quite as robust. So in this particular situation, it's like the case that we talked about with New York. She said, give me a court case dealing with Massachusetts non-competes. And it gave back a case, a specific case. It had facts that were in the case. She then said, is this a real case or did you make it up? And the response immediately was, I apologize for the confusion. The case I mentioned, automated business systems versus ISCO, is not a real case. I provided a fictional case as an example to illustrate how non-compete agreements are typically evaluated. And then the sentence that didn't fit on this page said, if you want a case, do legal research. So somehow there's some snark built into this generative AI thing. But this other one was really, really important. And you guys are HR folks who, many of you I know have multi-state operations. You may be tempted to use generative AI to answer some of your multi-state questions. So Young was a step ahead of us, and this is what she asked. Give me the difference between Mass sick time and California sick time. Wouldn't you love it if you could type in that question? And we wouldn't love that, but let's say you would love that. And the answer was Massachusetts and California have their own distinct sick time laws, which outline the requirements. While both states provide sick leave, there are key differences, and then it lists some differences. One of the differences was with respect to payout of unused sick time upon termination. So Young said, I don't think California requires sick time to be paid out upon termination. So she was a step ahead. And it, if that's the pronoun we're supposed to use, said, you are correct. And I apologize for the error in my previous response. As of my knowledge cutoff date in September 2021, California law does not require employers to pay out accrued but unused sick time. So what I found interesting about that is, first of all, this polite, sorry for the confusion, but it said, as of my cutoff, California doesn't require it. But then in the earlier sentence, it said it does require it. So it's not perfect. It's not perfect. Now, that's a fundamental issue that we would want to believe was reliable, and it isn't. Luckily, So Young is an expert on different state leave laws, and so she could say, I don't think you're right about that. And then it confessed, yep, I was wrong. So again, the quality control piece here is real. There's a lot of promise in this. I can see a lot of the tasks that you all do on a regular basis that will be made easier with generative AI. But I can also see that we could all be running amok if we're not careful about how it's used. And you really do have to stay a step ahead. It's only helpful if you are an expert and you are bringing your expertise to bear. Just showing up with the answers is going to get you in trouble. Okay. Yes, Donna. Well, and that's a good, you know what you're looking for, you know what it should be, and it can do it quickly, but you're paying attention to the content. You're gonna vet it. I think that's beware and vet. I think that's really the mistake is if you assume it is going to be right. I think that's just a really fundamental mistake to make with all this. All right, the other thing I want us to talk about for a minute here, because in the HR realm, of course, we have a lot of risk of discrimination, right? And first of all, we know that some of these large models are biased because they're trained on information that itself may be skewed, and they don't know enough to know that. So they may be spitting out information that's skewed. And we're all subject to very strict laws about discrimination. So it's an area that's really worth paying attention to. It is crystal clear that it will not be a defense to say, but I use this platform, right? The fact that the platform is what created the bias is not going to be a defense to a discrimination case. So it's important to just understand that. I think that what would be helpful if you are going to be using a platform for anything, and you really have to start thinking about all of your software vendors, right? All of the things that you use on a regular basis, especially in the hiring context, to ask the question, what are you using for AI? Not to say you cannot use AI, but what are you using and how is whatever you're using trained? I think that's a due diligence issue that we should all hold ourselves accountable to, because it will not be a defense if that platform is biased and that created a risk of discrimination in your action. You're the one that's going to be on the hook. I don't think the EEOC isn't going to go after the platform. So I mean, they may on a different level, right? If they're constantly engaging in bias, they may, but in terms of your own risk, you've got to stay a step ahead of it. If you're using any tools, if you use I don't know, resume collecting tool, I would want to find out, do they have AI in their algorithm? What are the assumptions? What's the training? So that you're not just blindly assuming, well, they're using an algorithm, that's not AI. They may be using AI. So asking that question, I think, is my point. All right, EEOC has issued some guidance in this area. And again, they're iterative about this too. We'll continue to see more guidance, I think, as the years go on. The important thing that the EEOC has said in their definitions is we believe that most software is developed using generative AI in some level. They are using that in algorithms. Make sure you know that, okay? So that's the first and foremost thing that the EEOC is saying is it's embedded in a lot of places. So buyer beware. The guidance also identifies the places where the EEOC sees the greatest risk of a threat of discrimination. So carefully consider resume scanners that prioritize applicants, okay? So if you have a resume tool that prioritizes people for you, that's a red flag that you should be asking, how are you prioritizing? What is underlying your prioritization? Employee monitoring software that counts keystrokes or other factors. And this gets into an issue around ADA discrimination. So what is underlying, if you have any employee monitoring software, what are they basing normal on? What are they assuming should be the right number of keystrokes? Those are some important questions. Virtual assistants or chatbots that interact with job candidates. Is anybody using anything like that? Okay, good. I think that's going to be a whole different ballgame. Video interview software that examines a candidate's facial expressions. No one's doing that, right? That's probably what's coming, but at this moment, that's something that the EEOC is recognizing as some territory that's dangerous. Employment testing software that generates job fit scores. Again, you can see where there could be some bias built into that. Anybody using anything like that? Okay. Interesting case. This is in the trade journals. This was billed as the first AI case. The EEOC sued iTutor Group. It turns out it's really not an AI case. In that particular circumstance, iTutor set up a program. They programmed their software to automatically reject female applicants who are 55 or older and male applicants who are 60 or older. So that was irritating to me. 55 and older for a woman, 60 and older for a man, automatically rejected. And, you know, obviously that's not okay. So we're not surprised by the outcome here. They ended up settling for $365,000. And it turns out iTutor decided that it's an Asian company. They decided not to do business in the United States. I think that's probably best. But in this particular circumstance, that's intentional discrimination. If you set it up so that it's automatically screening out women at one age, men at another age, that's gender discrimination and age discrimination. So I don't know why this is always billed as the first AI case, but you can see that there are these sorts of, like, everybody's trying to get their arms around hiring, right? There are lots of things out there that people are using. This is just my caution to you to just be careful. Make sure that you know what you're using, make sure you've vetted it, make sure you know how it's been trained, make sure you assume that there's a generative AI in there, and handle it accordingly. All right, questions about generative AI?